Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Radical Center, where we talk about everything you want to know about in Canadian politics and provincial politics in Ontario, and everything you probably want us to talk about. If we don't talk about something you want us to talk about, maybe send us a message, and then we'll talk about it. No problem. Cody, how are you today? How's your week?
I'm doing great. I heard that there wasn't a lot of news this week, so we don't have very much to talk about.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I think you're kidding about that. There's been some pretty interesting news. We've got Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States, our kind and loving neighbor. He's saying he wants to put a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, but specifically also Canada, which is what we're very concerned about. This prompted, or maybe this isn't what prompted it, but basically the prime minister flew over to Florida to have dinner with him and maybe talk him out of it, or please don't do this, or whatever it is he will do in some diplomatic way. What do you think about this? We talked about this in our episode when we talked about the Trump election and the possible impact on Canada, and we knew that this could be potentially something that would be in the cards. But let's talk about it. What do you think this is? What do you think it's about? Why do you think Trump wants to do this? And do you think it's actually going to happen?
So there's a reason why I made sure that we talked about it at least once or twice in the last few episodes, and that's because eventually I didn't know if it was going to be now or January, but eventually we're going to get to this. And it's important for us to actually understand what's going on here. And I want to whether people hate or love Donald Trump, he's going to be the next president of the United States. And we don't have a choice in who the Americans elect. And again, like the week that Donald Trump won the election, I came on here and I said that he would be using it as a negotiating tactic. And what really bugged me from the beginning, which is not surprising, but there were a lot of journalists in Canada that have been so blinded by their hate for Donald Trump that they missed out on an opportunity to get elected leaders to the negotiating table. And, you know, you're going to hear, and you probably have heard at home, that there are economists and pundits saying that it's going to put our economy into recession. But again, what pisses me off the most is that they don't explain to you that it's not about tariffs. It's a negotiating tactic to get us to the table to work on border and trade, which is what the incoming administration sees as an issue. And I did do my own research this week, and when I want to prove my point, I go and do my research with media organizations like I might not like. But in September, the CBP, which is the American Borders and Customs, they recorded a record number of migrants at the Canadian border. They recorded 19 border posts on the northern border between October of 23 and July of 24. And it may very well pair in comparison to what's happening to the Americans at their southern border. But again, Donald Trump he clearly sees it as a problem and he's going to use it as leverage. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but it seems like the provinces have been taking a lot more leadership in taking charge to get to this solution. So I want everybody to be calm because this is the way Donald Trump operates. And this is the way he operates. I mean, he just Mexico, Mexico is already, uh, I wouldn't say caving, but they're already complying with a lot of what Donald Trump wants.
I
So,
mean, the reality is he has been talking about secure borders for the United States since his first term. Remember, you wanted to build a wall, which, turned out to be a bit of a disaster. But basically, he wants secure borders for the United States. And he wants to make sure that, people who are getting into the country, have permission to get into the country, right? And, it I think you're right. I actually agree with you. I think it's a strategy for him to get Mexico and Canada. I mixed them both. I said Mexico as in Canada and Mexico. um, to actually invest in the resources to secure their borders, right? I mean, the reality is this is going to cost money. It's not going to be free to actually have more secure borders. And I think, it takes resources to actually do that. And he's basically putting the two neighbors in a position where they have to invest in securing his own border, basically,
Yeah.
so that, he doesn't, have to, you know, use the usual rhetoric of build the wall, which didn't turn out that well for him anyway. I get that. I wonder though. I mean, we are a huge big country, and we share a very large border with the United States. This is not just a small little border, right? Um, it would take a lot of resources to manage that, and I wonder how much negotiation room there is for Justin Trudeau and how good of a negotiator he is. My first reaction when I heard that Trudeau was actually having dinner with Trump was that if he actually manages to get him to move an inch on the tariffs, if he actually manages to make this go away, he will become extremely popular again. What do you think, Cody?
I don't know. The short answer. I really don't know. It's possible. Not saying it's impossible. I think it would be unlikely for something like that to turn his fortunes around. If you look at the way he did it, like if I was Justin Trudeau, he kind of took off in the dead of night. I wouldn't have done it like that. I would have made it like a reality TV show because Donald Trump really likes that type of stuff. So, at 5 o'clock or whatever on a Friday evening, you call in the press at the foot of, Canada Force One, apparently that's what they call it. And you say, look, I'm going to Mar-a-Lago to negotiate with Donald Trump. We are inextricably entwined by pretty much every measure you could think of. And I would have made it a show. But I don't know, like like Donald Trump was in control of everything last night. So there is an argument to be made by both opposition parties, all of them, that Trudeau may have cowered. And so yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that one. I can't really predict that one. But there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, we'll see. I kind of see it because things are starting to get better, right? So as things are starting to get better, if he can manage to prevent another financial and economic crisis from even starting, that might give him a lot of goodwill with Canadians. And also, the fact people have a tendency to not want too much instability. And with Trump, which is, I think, something that Trudeau had been betting on for a long time, that if Trump had gotten elected, which he did, there would be too much instability. And Canadians don't like that, right? So they might want to keep the guy who's kind of got his hand on the wheel rather than, some new guy who basically tweets all day. And a lot of people don't even really like his tweets because of how, I would say, often unnecessary they are for a leader of a federal party. I wonder, I don't know, I can see it happening. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying he's going to be successful getting Trump to give him what he wants. But I think you're right. I think the Donald, came out of the gate with this one, and he's getting what he wanted. He got the prime minister to show up and have dinner with him, and he's going to be in charge. Donald Trump is going to be in charge. If anybody had any doubts about that, they shouldn't. Especially, I think he's learned a lot of lessons from his first presidency, He's learned a lot of lessons about what not to do and what not to say and how to go about things. And I think he's taking this a little bit differently. And I think, so far he managed to get two leaders of the neighboring countries to, you know, pay attention at least, and then it's a good starting point if you're going to negotiate anything. So we'll see how this goes. I hope Trudeau's successful. I certainly don't want Canada to go through that. I don't think anybody does, but we'll see how successful he is and how much impact it'll have on his popularity.
Can I just say one more thing? And you were alluding to it too. Donald Trump knows that his social media posts are going to influence policy, which is unlike any political leader on the face of this planet ever, like bar none, right? And the other thing is too, like you said, he's learned a lot from his first term. The Americans have something different than what we have in our system. Well, there's a lot of things different, but Donald Trump has the power of what's called an executive order, which is basically where the president has a limited ability to basically sign his own legislation. So January 10th, when he gets sworn in, you're going to see in the media, they're going to list off a whole bunch of these executive orders that he's going to sign. We don't have to wait for a bill to pass through their system. Donald Trump can do it right away. So that's the one thing that I'd be watching out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of impact that can have if it just happens so suddenly, so quickly. Let's talk a little bit more about our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He had a good idea. I think it was a good idea. We talked about it last week, the removal of the GST and the HST for the holiday period. He's talking about that a lot. And we've got some interesting positions from specifically the Conservative Party. The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, decided that he is not going to support it. What do you think of that, Cody? What is Pierre thinking? Why would he even do this? Is this going to be something that Trudeau gets? I mean, I think we talked about last week that this is something that Trudeau is going to get a little bit of popularity for, or not. The issue will be popular. Whether it'll change his popularity or not, that's yet to be seen. But it certainly is popular to give Canadians a tax holiday. What do you think of Pierre's position and where he's going with this?
Well, I'll start off by the actual rollout of the announcement. I agreed, but we were in agreement last week that we thought it was a good idea, right? The debate of whether it's good policy or bad policy is a whole other different thing. But yeah, it was a good idea. I think the one opportunity that was missed, that some of it Trudeau could have controlled and some of it couldn't, is that the rollout of it was really bad. Like Friday, it seemed like the only person who was against it was Pierre Poilievre. Jagmeet was also praising it. But then on Monday, like it kind of changed, not just because of the Trump tweet, but the Bloc came back and said, well, we need to expand these rebates to seniors. And then Jagmeet Singh came out and said that we need to expand it to seniors. So, I mean, like in a way, like they're kind of screwing up handing out free money. And it's not something that like he can control 100%. But the one thing that I will say is like I wasn't really that surprised that the Conservatives were voting against this because on the Friday it was announced, or was it Thursday? I can't remember. Anyways, when it was announced, Pierre's framing of the tax cut and the rebate check was that the Liberals were trying to trick Canadians, that they were going to use this bill to set a trap for their political opponent. And I mean, you could make the argument that it would be hypocritical for Pierre Poilievre to stand up in the House of Commons, criticize the government's reckless spending, and then support something that may or may not make the inflationary crisis worse. And I think they're also making the argument pretty effectively that, it's not Pierre that's the king of contradictions. It's Jagmeet Singh, because he's twisted himself into pretzels to support the government. right? And we've talked about this before, that when a by-election comes around and he pulls out of the supply and confidence agreement, and then he still continues to support the government. But at the end of the day, where the Conservatives are, where all the parties are, I think in the same way that the Czechs are not going to make everyone forget how much they hate Justin Trudeau, I think that by voting this measure, it won't necessarily make Canadians dislike Pierre Poilievre anymore.
No, I don't think so either. I just think that it's a first in a series of steps. I think
From
it's
Pierre or
never
from Justin? I don't mean to cut you
from,
off.
from Justin from
Okay,
Justin.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
it's I don't know if I'm reading what he's doing correctly. He's kind of starting to lay traps for Pierre that he's starting to fall into. Look, people like not having to pay the HST and GST. In fact, remember when the HST came in, how unpopular it was? People hate consumption taxes. They hate sales taxes. So that's a reality that we know. And the reality also is that this is happening during the holidays, during a difficult time financially for a lot of people. The purpose of it is to give people the opportunity to have a nice holiday season like they usually would with their families during a time of financial difficulty where they may be actually making decisions on what they can and cannot do that they wouldn't otherwise in previous years, right? That's the point of this. It's not, you know, let's get rid of the HST forever, and just see what happens to the economy and without it's like driving without a seatbelt. He's not doing that. So I think Pierre missed the point. I think what's going on with him is he wants to be the anti-Justin Trudeau party so much that whatever he does, he wants to oppose him. And you can't do that because that, not everybody is, even as unpopular as he is, you can't oppose every single thing that he does. If I were Pierre, I would have said, you know what? He's starting to listen to us. He's starting to listen to the concerns of Canadians. We are your voice in this house. We got him to understand that Canadians are struggling, and you can't really take credit for this particular idea, although I think it was proposed originally by the Conservative Party. I can't remember, but he can say that we're pushing him to do things for you. Of course we're going to support this. We're pushing him to make life more affordable. This is what we talk about all day long. It's off brand for Pierre not to support this. And when you start doing things that are off brand, people start to be like, whoa, what are you trying to sell me here? Is this genuine? Is this real? Is this really what you care about? Or you just want to be in power so badly that you want to fight with him on everything, right? I completely agree with you with Jagmeet. He's just not getting it right. Again, you don't have to oppose Trudeau on every single thing. Same thing with the Bloc. It's because he's so unpopular that everybody's like, oh, being associated with him is such a bad idea. But at the same time, nobody's actually ready to run an actual election. So they don't actually want to pull the plug on the government. So they say things and then they do something the opposite of what they say. And Canadians, again, can see through that, right? And it's bad optics for the opposition leaders, for sure, for different reasons. But we'll see how this plays out. I think that he's got a series of these traps, I would say, for the Conservative Party specifically, for the Conservative leaders specifically, to walk into. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of this as he gets closer to the election.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is a lot of traps that are going to be coming up. I mean, at the end of the day, the one thing that does matter is where Canadians say they're going to vote in the next election, and the ultimate measure of whether all of this works in favor of Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre or even Jagmeet Singh is whether public sentiment changes. So you're right. He is both parties, I think, might be playing the long game. I think they're just playing it the opposite way, right? They're both trying to set traps for each other, and we're going to get to a point where we're in something called silly season, which is where the political insiders call the crazy season before the election. So
Yeah,
we'll see how
I
it all
think
works out.
we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting
I
close,
think
right?
we're getting close to that. Let's talk a little bit about provincially and the impact on that. Doug Ford has been very vocal in the past couple of weeks. He's talking about matching the tax cut. He says he wants to do that. So and that's another thing. It's interesting to have a leader of a conservative party provincially say, "Hey, this is a great idea. I love it. I'm doing it too." And then to have the conservative leader federally say the opposite thing. But I sense that they don't get along.
No, they do, that's putting it mildly. I think they actually strongly dislike each other.
Yeah,
I think that's one of
yeah,
the reasons why we might be headed for an early election because they're going to butt heads, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, what do you think of Doug Ford's stance on this? He also talked about wanting a. We talked about this last week a little bit, but now we actually see why, I guess. He wants a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. What do you think of what Doug Ford's doing, his leadership style, his ability to insert himself into the conversation, even though it's more of a federal conversation? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think Doug Ford, if there's any winner in all of this week, I think it's Doug Ford because his leadership style this week was actually it was quite astounding. As soon as this tweet was sent out, he did what I would have done, which is a press conference the next morning. He gave his opinion, he answered questions, and he said, "Look, we're gonna get to work whether the federal government does or not." I don't think that was like a shot across the bow to the federal government. I think it's just Doug Ford recognizing that the provinces have a part to play as well. I mean, you look at Quebec is sending their provincial police to the border. Alberta is proposing using their provincial drones and provincial law enforcement. And Ontario is looking at something similar. So I think when it comes to the approach with the tariffs that Donald Trump is threatening, I think that Doug Ford has done an effective job of not just standing up for Ontario, but he's really brought all the premiers together. I don't think because he's the chair of what they call the what do they call it? It's the council of all the premiers. I think he would have done it regardless. Again, when it comes to the rebate checks and the tax cut, Ontario seems to be on board with both. Ontario's very different, as we explained last week, is where they're not borrowing money to pay for this. So there's an argument to be made about fiscal responsibility from the federal versus the provincial. But again, I think what matters more is that Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre, I don't think they like each other. I think
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure. I think
they're
yeah,
talking to different audiences at some times, right? And for me, um, I didn't vote for Doug Ford to be PC leader. I didn't vote for Pierre Poilievre to be the conservative leader, both for the similar reasons, where in the beginning, Doug Ford kind of came off as a little bit too much of a strongman. I've had my same reservations about Pierre Poilievre. But I mean, at the end of the day, we are where we are, and we just have to deal with the cards that we've been dealt, right?
say I would add to that that Doug has grown significantly over the course of his government and his government experience. I would argue that Doug knows the audience better than Pierre. And I think that comes with government. That comes with having to work with stakeholders. That comes with having to actually, because, being in opposition and being in government are very, very different things. Very, very different things. the resources you have, the exposure that you have, the understanding of issues, the meeting with stakeholders, and having much more deeper conversations into things, but also the threat of not getting reelected is very different than the threat of not getting elected.
Yeah.
Because when you haven't been there, and I know this myself, when you haven't been there, you don't know what it's like, so you don't know what you have to lose. But when you are in government, you don't want it to be short lived. So that's why you see often that, people say all sorts of things to get elected. But once they get elected, they almost always, especially in Canada, govern from the center, because otherwise it would be short lived. If you piss Canadians off too much, then they won't vote for you again. And I don't think anybody wants to become prime minister just for 4 years. So, but I think, just going back to my original point is, I think Doug knows the audience better than Pierre. But you're right, they are speaking to different audiences, or they sound like they're speaking to different audiences. But I also think the reason why Doug knows the audience better is because he's in government, is because he was booed at the Raptors parade. Was it the Raptors parade? Remember that?
Yes, yes. Yep, yep.
Right? And he was very unpopular in his first year of government. Right? People were like, "Whoa, what did we do? What did we elect here?" And they had to change course. And all of a sudden, they became, the guy who wants to fix everybody's problems. And that's all he cares about. And good for him for recognizing that early on. And I think that's done a lot for his popularity. We'll see if Pierre gets elected, if he recognizes it early on, or if he ends up, being a little bit too ideological for the average Canadian. We'll see. There was an election, we'll talk about this briefly. There was an election in Nova Scotia. Very interesting results. What do you think of that? And what do you think that means for a possible early election in Ontario?
So there's a lot of uh there's a lot of provincial elections that happened recently, right? BC was a scheduled election. Saskatchewan was a scheduled election. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia went early. In Nova Scotia, which just recently happened, they were the only party out of those four incumbent governments to actually not just grow their majority, but they actually went into supermajority territory in Nova Scotia. So in an environment where it is becoming increasingly hard for incumbents because of economic sentiment, it was quite remarkable. So like in generally, like for British Columbia and Saskatchewan, was in Saskatchewan it was a conservative majority government, and in BC it was a BC majority government, and those majorities significantly shrank. In New Brunswick, which is was a whole totally outside of the federal landscape in terms of the impact, the premier lost government, lost it badly, and he even lost his own seat. So I think we're looking at two provinces going next. It'll be not necessarily in that order, but it'll be Newfoundland and Ontario. Newfoundland's in a minority situation, and obviously Ontario, they're in a majority situation. I do believe that when the Ontario election is called, I do believe that Doug Ford will be reelected, and I think there's a strong possibility that his majority will grow. I just don't know if they're going to get to Nova Scotia level supermajority territory. It is a possibility. It is a possibility. But so that's just the landscape in Newfoundland and Labrador as well. Like that's where I was born. I was born in Gander, Newfoundland. And it was interesting because a poll just came out yesterday that is done quarterly, not yesterday, but a few days ago. It's done quarterly. It's a very small sample of 390 people, and they show that the Liberals have a 10-point lead above the Conservatives. So it's going to be interesting to see. Again, I think Doug Ford, which matters to us most, I think that what he's trying to do is before he pulls the plug, I think the only question that he's asking for himself is what do people want? And if people don't want an early election, then he might not do it.
Yeah,
But
I
that's
don't disagree.
yeah, it's a hard question to answer though, because if you're gonna pull the plug early, like that's a tough thing to explain, right?
Yeah, you can't really make an argument to have an early election when you are
The
a
majority
government
government.
and you have a majority government. Like, why do we need to have an early election? We'll vote for you again if we want to vote for you again. It's hard. It's certainly a very, very hard argument to make. And of course, it's something that the opposition parties would then go after him for. It's an unnecessary election, blah, blah, blah. But I think if he does it maybe in the spring of I think he's got until 2026, so it's a little bit
Yeah,
hard, right? Like
yeah.
it's a little bit hard. It's a bit of a hard sell to actually, have to explain why he needs a stronger mandate than when he what he already has, which is a majority government. So it's hard to explain that for
And
sure.
maybe he won't because in Nova Scotia, like
Hmm.
there was not endless article, like there wasn't a public backlash for calling
Yeah,
the election early. They actually rewarded the incumbent government for calling
yeah,
an early election.
yeah,
So, I mean, maybe Doug Ford, like we've discussed before, he's sitting on top of, a lot of popularity. He can afford to lose a lot of it, but is that worth it for an extra 4 years, right? So we'll see.
yeah. Also, I think it depends on how well specifically the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party leader would be doing. They're not doing well so far. They're really behind on fundraising. They're behind on everything, and they're still, you know, pretty behind in the polls.
Yeah.
But
And
I think the reality is people don't vote governments in; they vote them out. And I don't know. I just don't see Ontarians wanting to get rid of Doug Ford, who, as we said earlier, seems to be the adult in the room when it comes to all of these different economic issues that we are constantly getting hit with. He seems to be the only guy who's like, no, this is what needs to get done, or this is how I'm going to stand up for Ontarians, and he's doing it. He's putting his money where his mouth is. There are other issues in healthcare specifically, especially primary care that needs to be addressed. But they're trying to do some of that. But we'll see how that goes.
only time will tell.
I know. So thank you so much, Cody, for your very thoughtful insights today. This is it for the Radical Center. So tell us what you think. Tell us, will this be the beginning of Justin Trudeau's luck turning around? Will it be? Or will Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump get along? And will they get along well enough for us to be able to have a good 4 years in Canada? So we will see. Join us again next week, and we hope you have a wonderful week ahead.
All right. Take care, everyone.